It's time for the Ratchet and Clank review for the PS4. I remember seeing the large handful of Ratchet and Clank games back in the PS2 and PS3 days, but I never really got a chance to experience any of them. Fast forward to 2020, I picked this game up during a Best Buy Black Friday event for only $10. After completing it, did it spark my interest in playing the other games, or is it just a bucket of bolts? Let's find out. Upon research, this is a reimagining of the original 2002 Ratchet and Clank on the PS2. It seemed like every developer had a tag team duo during this time. Ratchet and Clank, Banjo-Kazooie, Jak and Daxter. Since this is the only game in the series I've played as of this review, there will of course be no comparison to the original PS2 title. The game centers around Ratchet, a Lombax mechanic who dreams of becoming a galactic ranger. After various story sequences take place, Ratchet meets up with a robot and decides to call him Clank. Clank says he's on his way to warn the home city of the Galactic Rangers from an army of the very antagonists who created him. So the two pair up and head towards the city. This is a shooter platformer. In each level, your goal is to get from point A to point B, all the while taking down many enemies with your arsenal of weapons. Ratchet can use his omniwrench as a melee weapon, as well as use it to break open containers to collect items inside. Clank acts as a backpack on Ratchet and can gain specific upgrades to help Ratchet reach higher platforms and even glide down from high above to safety. Most of the levels aren't huge by any means, and the vast majority are kind of a straight shot, but there's usually some exploration you can do. The game's core design feels like a 2D platformer, just morphed into a 3D environment. There's usually only one route available, and while there are various small areas to explore off the main path, many of which hold various valuable collectibles, the main design concept for the game is very linear. This isn't to say the levels are boring. They're well designed and keep the player's interest. It's fun to go through and wipe out all the enemies and explore every nook and cranny. Each level is a planet that you'll travel to, and every one is unique and aesthetically different enough to not become repetitious. Some levels take a break from the platforming and instead have Ratchet pilot his ship and shoot down some baddies. There's a couple of levels where platforming is the main gameplay style, but in order to beat the level, you have to take first place in a hoverboard race. The best level, in my opinion, is this one where you acquire a jetpack and are now free to explore with it. Thankfully, this level is the largest of them all, and it's just so much fun to fly around and shoot enemies from the skies. Ratchet isn't the only playable character, as Clank has a few of his own. While Ratchet focuses on combat first and puzzle solving second, it's the opposite for Clank. These levels are few and far between, and I like that they're not 50-50 with Ratchet, as they're not as fun as his levels, but they're a nice change of pace for the player. Every time you defeat an enemy, they will drop bolts for you to pick up. Bolts can also be found by breaking open boxes and various other destructible items like garden pots and even plant life. Bolts are used as currency, and as you progress further in the game, you'll be able to exchange them for different weapons. This is where the game really shines. There are way more weapons than I first thought available, and all are fun and unique enough to not ignore. Like the Groovatron, where it forces all enemies to express themselves with dance. Or my personal favorite, the Protodrum, where a giant stationary orb pulsates electric waves, great for crowd control. All the weapons are upgradable at the vendor box you purchase them from, but you'll need raritanium, a crystal mineral that is usually semi-hidden throughout the levels. If you upgrade your weapons with the right mods though, enemies can actually drop raritanium along with bolts. Weapons aren't the only permanent items you'll obtain. Various gear, such as the aforementioned jetpack, or magna boots will become available, some of which will allow you to explore even more areas, provided you can use the gear in dedicated areas. Now I just have to stop here and talk about the jetpack. While it is the best piece of gear you can obtain, it is such a disappointment that you can only use it on 2 different levels. I thought once I got it, I could use it anywhere on every level, but no, this is not the case. I understand the game was not designed around the jetpack, but it's such a tease after you get it that you want to use it all the time. Yes, it would make the preceding levels too easy in some situations, but I want to use it. Well, anyway, even though unlimited use of a jetpack is not a thing, the levels are still quite fun. The graphics are fantastic. There's quite a bit of detail and lots of charm throughout. The animations and frame rate are buttery smooth, even with a lot happening at once. Controlling Ratchet is simple, however there are two things I would change. The first is how different weapons are selected. You can map up to 4 weapons to the D-pad, but if you want a non-mapped weapon, you have to hold down triangle to access the list. I wish instead L1 was the weapon selector, as it just feels more natural to have a shoulder button have this functionality. And secondly, I didn't like that Ratchet's double jump is only to be used immediately after his initial jump. There were instances where saving his double jump was preferred for later use, but I couldn't. The voice acting was great, and there's a lot of humor written in the dialogue. I'd say the humor style is mostly geared towards teenagers to young adults, however I feel most age groups will at least get a laugh or two out of it. There aren't many boss fights, but the ones we got all hover in the mid-range of difficulty. Actually, the whole game on normal mode is greatly justified by the overall difficulty. You can change it to fit your playstyle anytime, but I was pleasantly surprised that normal mode wasn't too easy. One thing I kept thinking about was that I wished Ratchet's movement was just a bit faster than what it is. It wasn't until I was nearing the end of the game that I noticed in the extras menu you can actually change the game's entire speed. This in turn makes Ratchet move faster, to the point where this is what I feel Ratchet's normal speed should feel like. Changing the game speed is only unlockable after you pick up at least 5 golden bolts hidden throughout the levels, but the fact that this is even an option is amazing and highly appreciated. Even though the game has many positives, there were a few things I wish were different, like the 2 controlling issues I previously stated. Also though, some of the levels are a bit short, and the whole game in general is just a tad too short. There are a few instances that didn't really make sense, such as here, the top of this platform hurts Ratchet and he quickly hits an out-of-bounds death wall, or like some of these volcanoes look like you could stand on them, but you can't. Overall though, it's a great game and I'm glad I picked it up. It makes me want to play the original PS2 games, and you don't need to wait to get this one on deal like I did, as at the time of this review, the everyday $20 price tag is definitely worth it. This game gets a 4.25 out of 5 with the title of Awesome.